right back up where we left off, and we're going to talk about the 5 questions about the perceptual world. I'm going to go through each one of these individually, so that way we can use examples for each one. So the first question is what is the perceptual magnitude of a stimulus? How can you determine what you're hearing, what you're seeing, and how do we place value on that in order to study it? So we use something called magnitude estimation. So magnitude estimation is a psychophysical method of assigning a number to a stimulus that you would say is proportional to what you understand is the magnitude of that particular stimulus. So it would be like assigning a value to a sound or to a light intensity. So you might say, that's really loud, I give that a 10. That's slightly less loud, I give that a 7. That's really, really, really loud, super, super loud, I'm going to give that a 20. Okay? And it's just assigning values and estimations of the magnitude of what it is that you're experiencing. Example of this is light. Okay? So you might observe one bulb being a magnitude estimation of 10. Okay? Now, you would think that if we were to use magnitude intensity by just basic math, that if you determine that one bulb is 10 intensity, that you would think that a person would judge 2 bulbs at a 20. But it turns out we don't do this, okay? This is why the difference between physical and perception is important. Okay, what you're physically seeing in terms of physical intensity and your perception or perceptual intensity, these are very different things sometimes. So it's important to understand the difference between the two and the fact that they do not necessarily go hand in hand. So if you have a person judge and determine that one light bulb is an intensity of 10, a lot of times what they end up doing is if you double that, they don't double the intensity. Usually they only go about 20 to 30% higher in intensity compared to the original intensity. So it's important to understand that it is not a 1-to-1 ratio, and that physical intensity and perceptual intensity can be 2 different experiences. Okay? Now, the second question that we have about the perceptual world is recognition testing. Okay? Now, how do we identify what it is that we're looking at? Okay? So, what do we see, for example, in this picture here? Okay? So you can flash this picture really quickly. What did you get from that picture? Okay? Write down everything that you saw. Okay? So if you said something like, I saw houses, I saw a boat, I saw water, okay? You are right, but you didn't get everything, right? So when we ask people to really quickly recognize items on a flash scene, we find that most people will recognize very general properties, like, for example, these houses here, a boat, the water, but they need more time to perceive the details. So recognition and identifying what you're seeing will change based on how much time you give somebody and what you tell them to attend to. So if I were to do this picture and say, I want you to, and I do like a little focal point here and say, I want you to look here. What you might see versus me saying, look here, or look here, or look here very quickly might change based on where I tell you to look. What you recognize and what you're able to recall may change. But can you identify and recognize different stimuli in the picture? So that would be an example of visual recognition. Another question is, how quickly can you react to whatever it is that you're looking at? When it comes to reaction experiments, we want to see, usually in milliseconds, how quickly can a person see something? How quickly can they react to whatever it is that they're seeing? Okay, so this would be an example of a reaction time experiment. So the person is told to look at this fixation point here, but pay attention to location A. They're going to push a button as quickly as possible when they see a dark target flash anywhere. Okay, so if they see it here or here or here or here, okay, and what we find when we measure this, so we have it go in random places, right? Okay, and have them focus on, we have a focal point here, but pay attention to this region. What you find is that reaction time is going to be faster when the target is flashed near this area that you're paying attention to, right? Than when you see it flashed anywhere around here. So here, lower means that they reacted more quickly, right? So this is a faster reaction time. So we can say 325 milliseconds versus, let's say, about 375 milliseconds. So we could say that there was you took 50 more milliseconds longer to respond if the target was anywhere here, or the flash was anywhere here versus anywhere around A. So how fast do you react is important to perception. How quickly do you identify something, and how quickly do you react to that? The next question, question 4, is how can you describe what you see? What is what we refer to as your phenomenological report? Okay? What can you actually describe in terms of what you see, and how is that impacted by your environment and the things around you? Okay, so I've got some instructions here. Go to the slideshow mode again if you're doing this through slideshow. If not, you can just keep this how it is. You might recognize some of these images, but I want you to think about what it is that you're seeing. So here, what do you see when you see this image? I want you to take one quick second to sort of describe, maybe in your head or out loud, what do you see? What's the first thing you see, and then what do you perhaps see after that? So what you might see is a vase, right? So if you look here, this is like a vase that you might put flowers in, right? It's terrible flowers. I'm actually a much better artist than this, okay? So what do you perceive? What is it that you see in relation to this particular image? Okay. Now, if you see a light vase on a background of dark blue, that's one thing you could perceive. Another thing you could perceive is faces. Ooh, that's terrible. Let's try this again. We'll put an eye here and an eye here. Okay. Do you see faces? And here are the lips. Okay. Mouth, right? And the faces are blue against a light background, okay? Depending on how you describe what you see, okay, could be different from person to person. Again, let's take a look at this image. What is it that you see? This is called the Hermann grid. What do you see when you look at this? Okay. Do you see dark spots at the intersections of the white corridors when you look at these here? Okay. These are not any different color than anything around it. It's all white. Why is it that you perhaps see something that's a little bit, that's not there? Okay. We're going to talk about this more later, but this is something that you have to think about in terms of how do you describe your experience? How do you describe your perception? Another question the final question that we have, okay, is how do you interact? So this is like thinking about the action step of the perceptual process. How you act based off of your judgment of what you see is important. So later on in chapter 7, we're going to see that people actually judge a box to be a lot heavier if you think you're going to be lifting it versus when you think that someone's going to be helping you or someone else is going to be lifting it. So if you look at this box, you might go, oh, I got to pick that up. That looks really, really heavy. But if you look at the same box, you're going to be less likely to think it's so heavy if you imagine that you're going to actually have help. So how do you react? How do your judgments and your biases interact with how you perceive the world around you? So one thing that we can determine from these questions and our studying of these questions, like for example, with the difference between physical and perceptual intensity, we know that, for example, there is not a one-to-one relationship between physical intensity and perceptual intensity, right? We know that sometimes we see things that aren't physically present, but we've sometimes failed to perceive stimuli that are physically present. Why is that? Why does that occur? Okay. And we can see, for example, that if you look at the electromagnetic spectrum, there are certain things that we are physically blind to, right? So we can't see ultraviolet rays. We can't see these energy bands. We can't see infrared energy bands. This is the limit to what we can physically perceive and actually say, I see that. And then there are some people who are limited in this, and they can only see certain, they can only perceive certain visual colors and lights. So when we put all this together, okay, what we have to measure perception, these physical instruments, okay, they can record what our brains might recognize, right? But it might actually be different from what we're able to actually talk about and what we physically perceive. And it's the uniqueness of this, right, that makes psychology. That's what psychology is. It's looking at human perception and looking at, yes, there are laws of disciplines like physics that we need to take into account, like, for example, the electromagnetic spectrum. But we also need to see what is the human experience. That's what this is. This is the human experience. What is it that we are looking at? How is it that we are perceiving this? And what are we doing about it? What's the action? What's the end result that we're interested in terms of sensation and perception? So do we see it? Can we perceive it? What happens when we don't? What happens when we do? What happens when there's something there that we can't see, or vice versa? So all of this hopefully will be explained in this course, or at least some information towards it, because we certainly don't have everything all figured out, but we can at least try to study it and get somewhere with it. So if you have any questions, please let me know and I'll be happy to answer them.